Let's talk The Empire Strikes Back. Welcome back to the Force with Friends podcast. My name is Will with the Padawan Pops YouTube channel, and this is my friend and co-host Kevin. And if you did not know, we have been walking through the story of Star Wars from episodes 1 through 9, and you've picked us up on a great episode on episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. I know it's a lot of people's favorite Star Wars movie. Kevin, where does this one land for you? Like, it's the stereotypical number one.
It really is. Yeah, I get why completely. Like, I think mine has always been Return of the Jedi, but I think that has a lot more to do with seeing as a kid and the nostalgia of it and just like the big set pieces and the victory at the end. So, but watching it through, I mean, I will admit that Empire is a better paced movie. It's just flows really well throughout. So I totally understand why it's everyone's number one. It's definitely in my favorites, but I think number one's always going to be Return of the Jedi just because of what it was as a kid when I watched it.
Yeah, well, so for me, watching it, I'm kind of in an identity crisis as a Star Wars fan, I think, because forever and a day, my favorite has been Empire Strikes Back. I remember like the first time I watched it as a kid, and then episode 3 has always been up there for me too. But Empire's always been my favorite. But the way we've been going through this story as like episodes 1 through 9, telling this Skywalker story, episode 5 is not exactly a surprise given that you're watching it and you know that Vader is Luke's father. And so I mean, and I've known that for, I'm 30, so I probably watched this first when I was 5. So for 2.5 decades, I've known Vader as Luke's father watching it, except for once. And so at this point, I don't know why I'm like, maybe I enjoyed A New Hope better picking up off episode 3, but I think it's just how we've been watching it more so. Because if I just am like, okay, what am I going to throw on and enjoy the most? It's Empire every day of the week.
Sure.
But now it didn't do it for me as much here. So I don't know.
That's interesting. It makes sense though, because I mean, right, that it's only the big reveal bombshell once, right? And then after that, if you're watching it for the story, and if we're doing it through that lens, it is different than just sitting it down, to enjoy the movie. So that's an interesting take. I hadn't thought about that, but it makes sense.
So if you're new, the way we've been doing this is we're trying to pick up on themes throughout the movie that go into the overall themes of Star Wars. So if you're thinking like, oh, they're missing this, that, or the other, we get that. We are not hitting on some topics. Like we have been grossly negligent with Han Solo because he just hasn't played into the overall theme of Star Wars yet, but I promise we'll get there. So that's where we're going. So a few topics for today that we thought would catch the essence of Star Wars best out of this movie. So obviously the name is Empire Strikes Back. So we're going to start off with the Empire's Revenge. What's going on after A New Hope? We're going to go through the twins. So we're going to see what Luke and Leia are up to, because that is the focal point of this Skywalker story and in the originals. We're going to talk about the Hermit. So that will be Master Yoda. And then the big reveal, which if you're watching this the way we're talking about it, it is not a big reveal, but it's probably the biggest reveal in all of cinema.
Yeah, if there's anybody out there who doesn't know this and we spoil it for you, sorry.
You can unsubscribe from me if I ruined.
Frankly, that's your fault. So.
Yeah, if I ruin Star Wars for you, you can totally unsubscribe. I understand that. But also you need to watch more movies.
Yeah.
So let's get started on the Empire's Revenge, because that's what this movie is all about. It's about the Empire getting their revenge on the rebellion. So episode 4 has ended. The Death Star is blown up. Luke is kind of coming into his own. Leia is really coming into her own with the rebellion. But we're going to see that victory is short-lived. We are just a few years after episode 4, and we pick up on Hoth. The rebels are essentially already in trouble. The Empire's been trying to hunt down Luke Skywalker. They're hunting down this secret rebel base. and the rebels are having to get out of Dodge quickly because the Empire is on their way.
Yeah, it doesn't even seem like they've been on Hoth all that long, right?
No.
Their base gets discovered pretty quickly, and things go very south for them. So
Yeah, it's well, this movie starts off, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit off the screen, but the rebels lose every single time they're in
yeah,
any type of conflict in this movie, and it starts off quick. They're on Hoth, but it's almost as if you don't realize they're losing because Luke is once they rescue him, he gets attacked by the animal, and
the
then
Wampa.
the Wampa, yeah. So
Yeah,
he gets attacked, they get back. The pacing is pretty intense, like, hey, we got to get out of here. But Han
yeah,
Solo's getting ready to leave. He's like, I'm out. And then Luke is getting ready to leave. He's got somewhere to go. They even take down the AT-AT. It almost seems as if they're winning, but I mean, the Empire blows up their base, or they take down the shield generator, and Vader raids the base. So they don't win, but it almost makes you feel as if they do because they all get away.
yeah. And I mean, I was thinking about that as I was watching it because really, everybody who's outside fighting, with the exception of a few people, die. Right? Like this is a
Not a
lot
good
of the
day.
rebel forces that are just wiped out. And
Yeah.
so it is like the end of the movie is more of like the personal losses, but this is really like the Rebel Alliance has lost to the Empire that happens right at the beginning of this movie. I mean, they lose a lot here, right? They get out their non-combat personnel, and they get the fleet out and all that, but for all intents and purposes, they get wiped out pretty good. So
Yeah,
not
they
not a
do.
good day for the rebels.
No, this is not a good movie for the rebels,
No,
but
no,
but
not so much.
they they obviously they find the hidden base, so the rebels are all over the place. They're scattered, and so Vader wants Luke. We learn about that very briefly in the movie that
Yeah,
he wants Luke, the Emperor, with where it redoes the Emperor, and you get the Episode 3 Emperor in there on the hologram versus the
yeah,
original, but you get a little piece there. But we know through comics and literature that the Emperor and Vader, they want to know who the pilot is from the X-wing that blew up the Death Star, and they eventually figure out. Boba Fett brings the intel after a few comic issues of looking, and he lets Vader know that his last name was Skywalker, and so they know, hey, the son of Skywalker lived. They don't know about the daughter yet, which we'll get into later,
yeah,
but we get a little bit of idea of, okay, they need the son of Skywalker. They still don't like Han Solo because obviously he was there, so they want the Falcon,
yeah.
and they obviously want the rebellion smushed. So that's where the Empire is really going in this episode. And if you look at it, they check all the boxes pretty simply.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to know at this point that the Falcon is Han, and that's a good chance that's where Leia is, right? So she's obviously a big part of this too that they're tracking down. So yeah, I mean they start this off by pretty much scattering the rebels. I mean they're off to wherever they're going. They're kind of in disarray and having to reorganize, and our key players don't get to that point, right? They disrupt enough to where Han and Leia are just constantly on the run, and they don't ever really get to regroup. So no, which is a good chunk of this plot is them getting chased by the Empire.
Yeah, it really is. And you mentioned pacing, that it's a pretty well paced movie,
Yeah.
and sometimes some Star Wars movies kind of get complaints about the pacing, or oh, it's too slow, or oh, it's too fast. This one does a pretty good job of keeping you engaged throughout the whole movie, I think.
Yeah, I think everything either drives the plot or the character interactions. There's a lot of that in this movie that's especially with Han and Leia and the Falcon that drives their relationship and your investment in them. And so there's not really anything in the movie that's just kind of dead time. It's all pushing towards some sort of character growth or plot movement.
Yeah, for sure. And so the Empire's Revenge, really, that's kind of a brief topic to touch on, but I thought we needed to because
Yeah.
it drives every piece of the movie. So it's the Empire chasing everyone else or baiting Luke in, which we'll see later. But everything they're doing is driving this plot. You get Han and Leia on the asteroid and the worm on the asteroid, and so they're on the back of the Star
Yeah.
Destroyer. You get a lot of character development with both of them, but also you get Luke and Vader. You get Luke off training, all because of the Empire's pursuit. So there's a
Yeah.
lot that really this entire movie is driven by the Empire striking back. So let's transition from there a little bit. I know that was only about 5 minutes on that topic, but really it was just to say, hey, this is what's get the ball rolling in
Yeah,
this
it sets
movie.
up the whole movie. So
Yep. So this one we kind of went back and forth on how we should go about these, whether we should talk about Luke and Leia first or talk about Yoda first. Really, tomato, tomato, we're going to overlap a lot with both.
yeah,
So let's talk about where we find Luke and Leia in this movie. Now, Skywalker's story, this is Anakin's story. The prequels are about the father. The originals are about the children. So we're going to spend a good chunk of time here. So we start the movie off with Luke, and he's in the cave on Hoth, and within a few minutes, he's using the Force. So he was not using a ton of the Force in episode 4. He was very new to it. He was just a few
yeah,
days in on it. But here we see in episode 5, he's pulling that lightsaber to himself. He's using it. So immediately you see, okay, Luke is walking in his father's footsteps. That's a big jump forward from where we were in episode 4.
yeah. And you can, I feel like you can see the evidence of what lack of training looks like, right? To be a
Yeah.
Skywalker and have that much trouble. I mean, that's what it is, right? He hasn't been trained, so even something as simple as pulling a lightsaber, he's still really got to focus and concentrate. It takes him a moment. It's not going to be the Force being used in the way we've seen in the prequels, right? These Jedi who have been training for years, these Master Jedi's, who it comes as like second nature to.
Yeah.
That's not where Luke is, right? It's very much not a second nature. It's a I have to stop and think about this nature. And so
Yeah.
while he's getting there, he is not. You could argue he's not a Jedi, right? Like he's just trying to figure this thing out, and still has a lot to do to get to that point where you could say he's a Jedi in this. So
Yeah.
does use the Force, not well, but he's getting by with it. So
Yeah, he's able to protect himself from non-Sith at this point with the Force.
yeah,
So
there you go.
it's done him well. He's okay with a lightsaber for sure. But he gets to Dagobah, so it's evident that he continues to have these conversations with Obi-Wan,
Yeah,
because he's he's always going Ben, so he's having these conversations with Obi-Wan, but he still hasn't been trained yet. So as he's escaping Hoth, he goes to Dagobah, and this is where watching this movie from the lens of 1 through 9, seeing the parallels from Anakin to Luke, I think I picked up on him more this go around, because he's very uh what's a good way to put it, he's pretty aggressive with wanting to get the training going. He's not patient. He's
no,
almost kind of, I don't want to say he's arrogant, but he's not necessarily easy to deal with when it comes to getting the training going, a lot like Anakin. And you
yeah,
hear some of Yoda's complaints to Obi-Wan about he's too young, or he's too old to be starting the training, or he's not patient enough, or all these different qualities that we see in Anakin in episodes 1, 2, and
yeah,
3. Well, here's Yoda having to look at all the same qualities in Luke, except when it was the qualities in Anakin, they couldn't have dreamed what it would turn into, and now
yeah.
they're a little more cautious about it as far as the story goes.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. You get kooky Yoda at first, who's just being silly and messing with Luke, right? He's
Yeah.
trying to gauge who this person is, right? Who is this Luke Skywalker?
Mhm.
And he comes to the conclusion that he's too much like his dad, right? He's too much of a risk. This could end badly. Look at what happened to Anakin, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the same complaints, like you said. He's too old. He's too rash. He's got too much anger in him. Um, and Luke, I think, I don't even, it is hard to pinpoint because I don't know that it's arrogance. It's just he has such a small, I think, view of the Force right now, right? To him, it's all
Yeah.
about him and him using it and learning to use it. I don't think he grasps how big the Force is. And that's part of, some of the conversations that Yoda will have with him, is that this thing is bigger than him. And it's not just this tool that he's here to master and use as a weapon, but that it's this big thing that he's got to be able to understand before he's going to even be able to use it in a way that's going to really matter. And so it is really a cool interaction because you definitely see Yoda's fear and hesitancy, and even more pushback that he had with Anakin. Right, with Anakin, he didn't like it, but he agreed to it. But here, he's like, no, I'm not doing it. Right, he argues with Kenobi for several minutes, like I'm not training this kid. Like
Yeah.
it's not going to end well. And we see why, right? We know why he's giving so much pushback.
Yeah. And I do think it's, again, I've never watched Star Wars through this lens before. I think you've kind of said
Yeah,
this is your first time watching it this way too. But I typically am not one who enjoys the whole Luke and Yoda on Dagobah. Just when I've watched it previously, I really love once they get to Bespin, the whole story there. But
yeah,
I really enjoyed maybe this section even more so watching it the way we did, because, and we'll get to it with Yoda as well, but just knowing everything that's led up to this point, and then hey, it's finally here. Luke is really ready at this point. It technically really ready. He wasn't, but
yeah,
seeing it as this new hope is here, and he is starting the training now, and Master Yoda's doing it, and in the character's head, as far as canon goes, he's got to be thinking back on what happened with Anakin. And so I just think it adds a
yeah,
lot more weight to this than how I usually watch it. If, oh, Luke just needs to go here to not do well and then go to Bespin.
yeah. No, I agree. There's some really cool lines and just lore pieces that come out of his conversations with Yoda as well that are really interesting.
Do you have any other things on Luke to hit on?
Well, yeah, not right now. I mean, we've kind of arrived at Dagobah where he's going to go through his training. So I mean, I think as we talk about Yoda, a lot of that stuff will involve Luke. But
The Leia portion is really the most interesting to me, because one thing, Disney Star Wars catches just a lot of crap for a lot of good reasons, right? They've hit grand
yeah,
slams in some aspects of entertainment, and they've hit into a triple play with the bases loaded on others, right? So
yeah,
they've not always done great. But
sure,
I think the focus of the new Star Wars, to where we have so much more Leia content, and essentially the sequels turn out to be about Leia, whether intentionally or not. That's
yeah,
kind of what happens. She's the Luke Skywalker figure of the sequels, and I'm okay with that. And I think when you look at episode 5 is really where that starts. Technically, it starts in Kenobi, but episode 5, you get that little line where Luke is rushing off from Dagobah, and they're warning him like, "Hey, you're gonna run into some trouble here." And they're going through all that trying to get him to stay, but then Obi-Wan says, "That boy's our only hope," and Yoda says, "No, there's another." Now,
yeah,
watching it as someone who's just watched 4 and 5, you have absolutely no clue what he's talking about. But watching it 1 through 5, you know exactly what he's
yeah,
talking about.
yeah,
If you've read any of the from a certain point of view, any other novelizations, Yoda thought much more highly of Leia than he thought of Luke.
yeah,
So seeing this, it's almost as if, hey, if this thing with Luke fails, we still got a fighting chance, because Leia can be just as strong as he can. It's pretty cool.
yeah. And because in some ways she's a known quantity, right? Like she has these great leadership qualities. She's got a strong sense of justice, right? Like she's willing to step in and be on the front lines. And so I mean, you look at her character traits, and it would be easy for you to be like this. This is who I would want to train as a Jedi, right? Luke's such an unknown, and there's those fear of those traits that are Anakin, right? And so, um, yeah, we don't. It is interesting looking at it from the lens of 1 through 5 because we know who she is, and we get a little glimpse of it at the end, right, where she does have a moment of force sensitivity with Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, really up until this point, and throughout this trilogy, on the Force side of things, it's not her story, right? It is Luke and Vader's story, and so I am glad that she does feature a little bit more. I mean, the sequels do have her a little bit more prominently, especially as a Jedi, and so that is one thing that it's a shame we missed out on, because she was just as capable, right, of using and learning and mastering the Force as Luke.
Yeah.
We just missed out on it. So
Yeah, and just the way it turned out with Carrie Fisher passing away, that
yeah,
episode 9 script that wasn't able to be used, it was going to be such a great movie with her. Can't do anything about it,
yeah,
obviously. So they did the best they could. But I love the idea of
right,
this bigger focus on Leia. And I like the thought of, even if Luke had failed, that there was still a hope either way. And
yeah,
if Master Yoda knew that, as far as the character goes, then yes, there still could have been more story to tell. I would almost be interested in like a what if. You know how they did what ifs with Marvels, like those little short stories? Like, what if
yeah.
Luke had joined Vader, and then it turns into a Leia versus Luke to culminate everything? I think that would be an interesting little rabbit hole to chase, because you get to explore a Jedi Leia.
That would be fun. I would like that.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about it more in the next movie. But I also think I do think Luke had to be the one who would move towards this path of redemption for Vader as well. I think Leia's experience and history with Vader would have prevented her from being able to stop and say, well, maybe there's more to this person, right? And so it would have been interesting to see her in that capacity as the Jedi. But I also think Luke and his lack of experience and his naivety, right, which really pushes him to be more hopeful in some ways, is what allows him to even pursue that route of trying to do that. That's in the future. I don't even know why I
Yeah.
brought that up, but
I'll also say a 22-year-old guy, obviously hot headed, not straightforward thinking, things like that. You know, Luke would get into that. And so let's say he did fall. You start dealing with like a 22-year-old woman, she'll cut you off and be done with you, right? Like, it's not as if it's not as if, Vader's going to get too many chances. Leia would take care of business,
yeah,
probably.
yeah, no, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jedi Leia would handle herself fine.
Yeah, Luke's always got kind of a glass half full guy until
Yeah,
he isn't. But that's a different story for a different day as well.
yep,
So kind of moving with the twins, I think it's important to see here with both of them. They're both really coming into their own. Luke with his
yeah,
Jedi training, Leia with her role in the rebellion, also Leia's relationship with Han, and we see hints and glimpses that, okay, she's going to be force sensitive as well. Still, the viewer, if you're watching up to this point, have absolutely no clue that it's Luke's sister, because the kissing scenes would be really weird if you did know that.
Side note, I love the fact that this is probably something that Han held over his head for the rest of his life.
I would
Like,
love
I
to
can just
know.
imagine him being like, "Yeah, well, you kissed your sister, right?"
People from
Like
Tatooine
for
do
the
that,
rest,
right?
for the for the rest of Luke's life, just Han holding that over him.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would like also a what if on all of the one liners Han gives Luke about that. So
yeah,
we move here from the twins. Again, this movie doesn't set up just too much until the end, but we
yeah,
move into the Hermit. We move into Master Yoda. So we see him at the end of episode 3, and he's going to Dagobah. He's failed. He's kind of set his mind on he's got to get away. The Empire obviously
yeah,
can't find him, because Luke or Obi-Wan and Yoda are going to train these twins one day. That's the big plan at this point. So
right.
they've got to go into hiding. Yoda really is the only one with zero responsibility other than just to hide. So that's what he does. He goes and hides until the time is right, and he does very well at it because they don't find him. And then he starts training Luke. And so that next stage of his journey starts, and really it's the last stage of his journey. It's kind of crazy how much he aged over 23 years.
Yeah, he looks pretty rough when we when we run into him on Dagobah.
Yeah,
Yeah, maybe it's the humidity. I don't know.
it's true. It's not a great place. I know it's not the
No,
sunlight.
no, no. Yeah, the humidity, the dark side of the Force lingering around you. I don't know, something.
Those snakes that they just keep grabbing and throwing the whole time they're there. Did you know?
Yeah,
Did you count by chance how many times Luke just grabs and throws a snake?
I did not. I kind of
I
want to do
did.
that now. Now that you mentioned, you did. What was the
So
count?
living in Florida, that's a common thing. You just grab and throw a snake. But I picked up on it, I believe, 3 times that he's just because it's in Yoda's hut a couple times. He does it
Yeah,
like when he's getting ready to leave in his X-wing. He like grabs one and takes it out. And I was like, how many of these snakes are everywhere? But apparently a
that's
lot.
funny. Yeah, they're just like, Luke, we're just yeah, we're gonna keep putting snakes everywhere. You just gotta keep throwing them,
Keep
just
grabbing them
whenever
and
you
throwing them.
see one.
So
That's
with
funny.
Yoda, we touched on it a little bit in the twin section, but
Yeah,
he's been away for a while and he's ready to step back in the same way we see in episode 4. Obi-Wan's ready when they call his number. Yoda is also ready when they call his number. He's not overly enthused about it, given that Luke is like a walking talking Anakin, just less trained and a lot older.
yeah,
And so he's not super thrilled about it, but he trains him anyways, and we see that he still has it when it comes to the Force as well. I do think funny Yoda is obviously funny, but once he gets serious, I really like that.
yeah. No, he flips the switch pretty quickly, and then he's back to a familiar um, Yoda, he's always looking for the bigger picture, right? Like he's always trying to impress upon Luke, like that there's a lesson here, right? That this is not just about learning this skill in the moment, but there's a bigger picture that surrounds what I'm teaching you that you've got to understand. So, um, yeah, so one of the big things, obviously, he gets him to go in that cave, right?
Yep.
Got the dark side cave, which is a big moment, right? Luke confronts Vader there, which you don't know it at the time, but is a pretty big foreshadowing moment.
Yeah.
Um, and one that I imagine Luke looks back on, like at the conclusion of this movie, is like, oh, like this is even more of a warning, right? Like this is an even scarier thing now. Again, at the end of the movie, but he has that really interesting conversation with Yoda, where Yoda's like, you got to be careful about the dark side. It comes easily. It's not as strong, but it's easier. And Luke's like, well, how do I know, right? Like, how do you know the dark from the light? And Yoda makes that comment. It's like when your mind is calm and when you're at peace, like you'll just know, right? And so the solution is really just being able to not focus on all the problems, right? Which Luke is to an extent. Like he can't get the stuff out of his head, and I think that's what Yoda's worried about, right? Like that distinction and that discernment comes in peace. And like Anakin, Luke's not in a whole lot of peace, right? He's in his heart and his mind are in a bit of turmoil. Um, Anakin was anything but at peace, and so that discernment between what was ultimately going to be right and wrong, he failed at. So that's kind of a big comment from Yoda right there. It's one little line about how you discern between the good side and the dark side, the light side and the dark side, but um, it points to you know what Luke's going to have to deal with, and especially as we get on into this trilogy.
Yep. I love how Yoda's training, and you touched on it a little bit before. It starts off, and you don't even realize he's training Luke. He's just seeing how he interacts, and
Yeah,
will go about things not going the way he wants it to go. And so he's acting like a crazy old little hermit, and everything he's doing is just pushing Luke to see how he responds, and pushing Luke to see how he responds because obviously Vader's biggest issue is how he responds to things when it doesn't go his way, or
yeah,
Anakin when things didn't go his way.
yeah,
And so that's it, you don't even realize that's his training as it is, and it is his training. He's still the grand master, even though it, Jedi Order's gone. He's so wise, the character is, and
yeah,
all of the prequel stuff wasn't even written yet. So it's really cool to see how this doesn't contradict how Yoda still trains, because we talked about that last week. Some things you're like, oh,
yeah.
that doesn't make sense, but here the Yoda in 1 through 3 is still the Yoda in 5 and 6 and in episode 8 when Yoda shows up. That's a great
Yeah,
scene too.
still, he consistently stays himself. He feels like Yoda throughout.
Other than knowing how the aging for this species works, because Grogu's 50 and he's still a baby. Yoda says he's
Yeah,
been training Jedi for like 800 something years, and
yeah,
then he's what he looks like in 3, but then in 20 years he's got one foot in the grave. So
yeah. They hit a
again,
they hit a quick aging point, I think.
I'm interested in
Goes
how
downhill quick.
I'm interested in how Dave and John Favreau will explain that one
Yeah.
away at some point. But that's a different story. So either way, we
Yeah,
see Yoda here. He's ready to step up to the plate when he's called, and he does. Luke doesn't listen though, and when he's going, it's cool that they aren't just like, "Hey, you're in big trouble. This is going to end horribly for you." They do say all that,
yeah,
but they give him some pointers on the way out, knowing that he is going to go and he's going to be confronted with the dark side of the Force. I think that's a big maturity point from them, from where how they failed with Anakin to how they're trying not to fail with Luke. So Luke
yeah,
has decided, no, I'm not going to listen to you. And instead of just completely downplaying him, saying you're an idiot, saying we don't trust you, saying all these things, they let the choice be his, and they still give him some parting words of wisdom on the way. And I think that's completely different than what the Jedi Order would have done. So it does show
yeah,
how Obi-Wan and Yoda have matured from episodes 1, 2, and 3 as well.
yeah. That's a good point because they're right in their assessment that he's not ready to fight Vader. Right?
Right. Not
If
even
you're
close.
talking about an altercation, he's not. He's not there. He's not even close. And so it does point to their bigger concern is him falling. Right? Like they acknowledge he's not strong enough, but they're still letting him go and they're giving him those words of wisdom because that's the bigger fear, right? Not necessarily that he'll lose. Obviously, they don't want him to lose, but the bigger fear here is that we're adding to Vader, right? Another Jedi falling to the dark side who's just going to continue to wreak havoc. That's and so it is, right? It's growth for the Jedi to be able to look ahead and see, we can spurn this guy and deride him and make him feel like he has no support here, or we can say, look, we don't agree, but this is what you need to remember, right? Remember to
Yep.
be wary of the dark side. Remember these things. Remember your training. When Yoda's talking about remember your training, he's not talking about carrying him on his back through the
Yeah.
swamp, right? Like that's totally just messing with Luke, right? That's
Yeah.
I love that because there's no reason he needs to run miles in the swamp with Yoda on his back. Um, when he says remember your training, it's more about the Force and about how you keep that calm and how you continue to not give in to that anger and uh, that dark side of the Force that's going to be pulling him. And so they are aware enough to say he's going, so let's at least try to give him the tools as he leaves that might keep this from being worst case scenario. Um,
Yeah.
which you're right, it's different from how they handled Anakin because Anakin got all the judgment and the no, you're wrong, you can't do that, we don't support you. It was just a lot of criticism.
They made Vader. So
Yeah. Oh, totally.
it's cool to
Absolutely.
see how they're trying not to make another Vader, what like you said.
Yeah.
And so that really does transition us here. So Luke has left, he's gone to Bespin. The Empire has baited him in, which is
Yeah.
exactly what Vader was trying to do. So we'll move on to the big reveal. And the reveal is that he is the son of Skywalker. Now, again, as you're watching this, when Palpatine and Vader are talking and they're saying yes, he's the son of Skywalker, and Vader says it's impossible, and we're sitting there going, well, of course he's the
Yeah.
son of Skywalker. He's Luke Skywalker. We
His
know
name's
that much. And
Skywalker.
Anakin, he was a great Jedi. We know about that. But the big reveal is that Vader is Anakin.
Yeah.
So we get to Bespin, and Luke is fighting him, and it's interesting in that the Emperor wants Luke because he's already knows how the Sith work. If he can get a new Anakin that's not cybernetic and having to deal with all that stuff, this is a great day for Palpatine. And Vader is thinking,
Yeah.
if I can get another Anakin, we can take the Emperor out. So
Yeah.
they they're both thinking the same thing, which is they want Luke for more power. And it's just very interesting that the bad guys are pitted against each other. We don't quite realize it yet if you're just watching 4, 5, and 6, but if you're watching 1 through up to this point, Anakin's already talked about overthrowing Palpatine. He was talking about it back in episode 3 with Padme.
Yeah.
And so now he's
Yeah.
thinking, wow, we can really make this work. And so they're drawing Luke in for the same reason, but for very different reasons all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it goes right along with the rule of two, right? Like with the Sith apprentice eventually trying to take out the master. But
Yeah.
you also kind of wonder how if because obviously Vader knows now that Palpatine lied to him, right? Like
Yeah.
somehow Padme gave birth, right,
Yeah.
to his child, and so um, you have to wonder how much that plays into it too. Of like, oh, okay, so this thing that you roped me in with, you lied about it, so uh, you do wonder if there's some anger and bitterness that comes out of that. It's also part of I'm going to overthrow you, and I'm just going to get Luke to help me. So it's hard to know because obviously that this none of that was in motion when this scene took place, but it's
Right.
interesting to think about.
Yeah. I really like it thinking about it from that way. Like it's almost a race to get Luke at this point. And
Yeah,
episode 6 hits on it as well, big time when you're on that second Death Star.
one of the really cool things about this scene I hadn't thought about until we were watching it through this way is like this is really kind of the beginning of, in a weird way, of Anakin's resurrection and redemption apart
Yes.
from Vader, right?
Hmm.
Because to make this appeal to Luke to say I'm your father, that's Anakin, right? Like he has to somehow go back to being Anakin to say I'm your father, right? Because Vader has been very clear that he killed off Anakin, right? He tells Kenobi that in Kenobi, I killed Anakin Skywalker. He and Palpatine talk about Anakin as a third person, right? Like he's not in the
They
room.
do.
And so for all intents and purposes, Vader is this other person that now exists in the body of Anakin Skywalker. We talked about it in episode 3 where Anakin Skywalker would have never hurt Padme, right? But he nearly kills her on Mustafar because he's someone different now. But in this scene, to be able to say, Luke, I'm your father. That's who I am. That's Anakin Skywalker, right? And so a little bit of Anakin is being resurrected back in Vader to be able to say that, which
Yeah.
is going to set this course for him to be able to come back in a bigger capacity. And so I think it's really cool that it was his love for for family, right, for Padme, that made him made these drastic changes that pulled him away from the light. But now here's this other family that's going to pull Anakin back out and start pulling him back away from the dark. So it's a really cool mirror in an opposite direction of kind of what happened with Padme. And I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about that until watching through from this lens of going through the story.
No, that's for sure. Luke's existence is the straw that breaks the camel's back for sure because it is, like you said, it's what starts to reel Vader back in. And this movie, pretty early on, once you get that reveal that he's the son of Skywalker, that's really the turning point for Vader because
Yeah.
it messes with his head because he's saying that can't be true, and of course it's the search your feelings, you know it to be true, and then
Yeah.
they get on Bespin, and Vader and Luke have that fight, and I love that lightsaber duel. It's so good.
It's a
It
good one.
takes you obviously through different scenes. You see Vader is not just fighting with a saber, but he's throwing objects at Luke. He's messing with Luke's head. He's just trying to freeze Luke and carbonite at first too. So
Yeah.
he's not even wanting to kill Luke. He wants Luke alive. And obviously there's motives to that, but we see a different Vader than the one that fought Obi-Wan Kenobi on the Death Star. And obviously he lobs Luke's hand off, and then he makes his plea to Luke. He's
Yeah.
looking at him, and he starts this question, which is the mental messing with Luke of
Yeah.
Obi-Wan never told you about your father. And that's where it starts. Obviously the greatest scene in cinema history, probably. Everyone knows this one. Even
Yeah.
Trekkies know what's going on when it's when it's when it's
Yeah.
coming to this. So
Yeah.
you get that big reveal, and kind of like what we said before a few episodes ago, like how cool would it be to watch this as an adult having no clue? I don't think it's possible for someone to do that at this stage of entertainment. But how cool would it be for someone just to be sitting there and have zero clue about what was about to happen?
Yeah.
I would love for 1980 just to be able to sit in the theaters and see people react to that.
Yeah. The shock factor. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I remember when I first found that out, I was like, I mean, it is. It's like, because you assume he's lying, right? When he's like, no, I'm your father. You're like, well, he's playing a game here. Like something's up. But then they keep running with it. And then Luke's like, dang, it is true, right? And he's like lamenting that Ben never told him, and is like, wait a second, this is a real thing. Like this is
Yeah,
really his. And so even after it happens, you're kind of in a state of disbelief that it's like Vader's up to something, right? Like he's just messing with Luke. He's trying to recruit him. But then it sinks in kind of the same way for it does for Luke. It sinks in for the viewer. It's like, oh, this is actually true, right? And so if you hadn't seen 1 through 3, it's a pretty pretty big revelation that does take you a second to process. But
yep.
yeah, it'd be fun
And
to go back and watch people see that.
yeah, I wish there was, obviously if you had cell phones at the time, and you could just watch people going, oh, no way, because like
Yeah,
the big theater reveal for us in Star Wars, as sad as it is like my strongest Star Wars reaction is laughing at that Rey and Ben Solo kiss at the end of Episode 9. That is the
uh,
strongest in theater
that was
reaction I've had to Star Wars because I wasn't
mm,
around for the originals, and what was going to happen in the prequels
yeah,
we kind of knew to an extent because we had seen 4 through 6. So I
yeah.
envy the people that got to watch that live. It's just such a cool thing
Oh
to
man,
think about. But yeah, it's a big scene because like you said, Vader has to acknowledge Anakin at this point.
yeah,
And so Vader makes this plea to Luke, join me and we can take down the Emperor. And that is a straight up parallel to Episode 3, where he's calling on Padme, hey, join me. We can take down the Emperor, calling out to another family member, going to try to do the same thing, and he gets the exact same result as he does in Episode 3.
yeah,
Luke would rather fall down a shaft into a city that floats than join Vader. He chooses death essentially
yeah,
over succumbing to the dark side, which is where we see he's not Anakin. He's the better version of Anakin at this point, because when Anakin's tempted with it, he joins for the power. When Luke is at his lowest and tempted, I would rather fall through a garbage chute than
yeah.
do that. So that's a big character
It is.
moment
Yeah,
for Luke.
yeah. And that's ultimately what's going to continue to allow him to be a player, right? That's what Obi-Wan and Yoda were worried about, is this exact moment where he has this opportunity to say, oh, we can wipe out the Emperor together, right? Like, here's a
Sounds pretty
you
good.
know, yeah, let's do that. And it speaks too to the Emperor, like how evil and really awful he is, that nobody wants to follow him, right? But
Yeah.
he just digs his tendrils into people. I mean, Dooku did the same thing. He was like, listen, we can take him out together, right? Like, nobody wants to follow this guy, but he's so manipulative and so convincing, like, that people just fall into that, and then they don't see another way out, right? And so everybody that's following him, their only way out is like, I got to get help to take this guy down. And
Yeah,
so it's kind of a repeated pattern with people under Palpatine, is that they don't have a way out, right? And so you see that repeat again, Anakin twice, Dooku once, but I mean, it speaks to how truly evil and deceiving and manipulative, Palpatine really is.
for sure. Another thing is in how Luke is the better version of Anakin
Hmm.
is that
Yeah,
with the Jedi the connections are an issue. And so that's ultimately Anakin's undoing when his family he chooses family over everything else, and it causes essentially the whole galaxy to unravel.
yeah,
But when Luke, who raised as an orphan, and he's aware that he was raised as an orphan,
yeah,
and then he gets that father-like figure, obviously not a great one, but hey, this is your flesh and blood right here, the last one alive, and he's not caught up enough to even consider that either. I think that's a pretty cool picture because Anakin does everything wrong when it comes to his flesh and blood, and Luke
yeah,
is more in tune with fighting the good fight and what's right versus needing this sense of approval, this sense of belonging, this sense of whatever that Anakin fell to. Luke's nowhere close to that at this point. Now he flirts
yeah,
with it in Episode 6 a lot more,
right.
but at this point when he had barely been trained, he doesn't even fall into it.
Yeah, and two, we see, because it's kind of a big theme in parts of Star Wars, but this family that's grown up around him, right? And so
Mhm.
for him to join Vader is further endangering the people that are now his family. And so Vader's flesh and blood, but one thing Anakin didn't really have is a group of people who were on his side, right? Like you had Obi-Wan who wanted to, but he didn't know how to, right? Like he
Yeah,
didn't understand how to help Anakin. He would have if he could have, but he just didn't know how. He didn't understand what Anakin's issue was. So really, Anakin had Padme, who he was 100% sure was going to die. Um, but that's not the case with Luke, right? Like Luke has something else other than Vader, other than what that pull is, that's gonna that helps him keep on that side of, you know what, there's other things that I have to fight for that are not just vengeance, that are not just defeating an enemy. And so I think part of it is he's acknowledging like there are other things that I can't sacrifice to join you. And
yeah,
that's, again, that's something Anakin didn't have. Anakin kind of got to the point where he didn't have anything to lose. All he had to lose was Padme, and he wasn't willing to. So that it is an interesting parallel where we see just the circumstances around Anakin and Luke being so different that allow them to make better decisions or worse decisions.
for sure, for sure. And I like how this movie ends. So the big reveal is that Vader is
Yeah,
Anakin. Vader's Luke's father. If you're watching 1 through 5, you know that. But the big reveal for if you're a 1 through 5 watching through this point is that Luke isn't the same. And that's kind of our big reveal, is that he's the opposite of what Anakin does. So that's cool. I like how it ends where you see the force telekinesis or whatever, where they're talking to each other. We see all the remaining Skywalkers. Luke's talking to Leia. Luke's talking to Vader
yeah,
also at the end of it. It's a
yeah.
pretty cool way to end the movie. And you can almost kind of look over that because you're still kind of caught up in what you just watched.
Hmm.
But I do think that's neat as well. We see Leia, kind of like you said, she's force sensitive, but it's almost like it's a soft side of Vader when he's talking to Luke after they're gone, and they talk through the force as well.
Yeah, I think there is probably some desperation in Vader to somehow get Luke to listen, right? Because obviously Luke just jumped down this massive
A chute.
shaft to presumably fall to his death, right? Instead of joining him. And so now that he knows he's alive, I mean, Vader's got to figure out some way to get him to listen, right? And so he is, right. He's like, listen, this is right. Like it's me. And then we see Leia in the mix too. So it is kind of cool how it narrows in on the Skywalkers right at the end of this movie, and kind of closes out with that trio at the focus of what's going on here.
Yeah. And wrapping up episode 5, we talked about this earlier.
Mhm.
There's no hope. Like the good guys lose every step of the way, and somehow when
All
this
of it.
movie ends, you don't even have a clue. You're like, man, they've got a fighting chance with this, and they just they get whipped. Like Hans and
Yeah,
Carbonite, Luke's lost his hand. The rebels have had their base attacked. They
yeah,
have done nothing good in this
yeah.
movie, and
No, the
somehow
Empire's having a party.
it still ends with everyone thinking, man, they still have a chance. It's like they shouldn't, but they do. So it's cool
Yeah,
how it's such a dark movie that doesn't necessarily feel like it's such a dark movie as a whole.
yeah, and I think it just speaks to the journey that we've seen Luke and Leia on so far, right? That they've managed to get through these things and out the other end of them hurt, right? Damaged, both mentally, physically, emotionally,
Yeah.
but still in a place where they can continue on, right? And so the hope is that they've faced a lot of the worst the Empire has to throw at them, right? They had this big, huge military defeat at the beginning. Luke is utterly defeated in personal combat, right? Leia is unable to keep Han from getting whisked off into Carbonite to go join Jabba the Hutt. And so for them to be able to come through that and still be at a point where they can still fight, like I do think it creates a good tract of, hey, here's this hope moving through these situations. Here's where it's been tried, and it still comes out the other side. So I think that hope is just, it's there because as much as happened, our characters are still there, right? And they haven't. There's a sense of mourning, but there's not a sense of like this is over. And I think that's where you can end on, as oddly as you said, you can end this movie thinking, all right, they got a chance now.
Yeah.
It is a
And I think
weird
that's
thing at the
why
end of this movie.
yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
think that's why a lot of the times people that say this is their favorite Star Wars movie, that's probably why. Like it's such
Yeah,
a different movie than
yeah, it
anything
is.
else you'll ever see. And it's hopeful, but it's not all at the same time.
Yeah,
it's a fun viewing experience, and I think if
Yeah,
nothing
agreed.
else, that's we most people that watch Star Wars, I don't know anybody that has an issue with Empire. So I think that speaks a lot to this movie because Star Wars fans are pretty opinionated. So the traditional, as we've started on these, the four what do our wives think segment. Ashley didn't watch this one with me. Again, I watched it after work, but before she got home from work. But knowing how she has watched this in the past, she has no issue with it because again, it's a great movie, but she loves to make
Yeah.
fun of Luke Skywalker when he's like, "That's not true." She will sit over there like in the corner and just mock him. That's impossible. She'll go through all that because Skywalkers
In
are
her
so
Midwestern
whiny.
accent.
Yeah, the Midwestern Illinois
That's
accent.
great.
She will quote the
It's
whole
hilarious.
thing, and we'll just go back and forth making fun of Luke because he is so whiny in that point.
Totally.
But
Oh yeah. He's a big baby at the end. Understandably, but it's whiny.
yeah,
So Brittany also didn't watch this one. She was at some sort of where was she? She was at some sort of church event with some other moms or something. I don't know.
she
Um
missed the best Star Wars episode. She sat
I
through the
know.
prequels and didn't watch five.
I know. I was like, well, you're gonna have to catch up. Like, we'll try to double up, and you can watch it. I'll sit through it again, and watch it with you. So I do want to get her caught up because I think she's been enjoying watching through them. And she did enjoy A New Hope far better than the prequels, and so
Yeah.
I think she would like it too. So
Yeah. So that's it for Empire Strikes Back. We are moving through. So we
yep,
do this at the end of every episode is where are we at in this story of the Skywalker? So we've moved all the way through. Anakin has fallen, the Empire has come through, the chosen one is lost. The rebellion has come to challenge this empire. We learn that Luke and Leia are ready to join the fight. They lose a lot in this episode, but this is where Vader figures out that Luke's alive, and Luke figures out that Vader is Anakin and Vader's his father, and it sets us up for this next stage where
yeah,
the rebellion's going to make their one last stand against the Empire. So I'm excited to see if they're able to win or not next week.
yeah. It'll be a shocking surprise. I don't know. Looks
Yeah,
pretty dark for our heroes.
maybe
Which the next movie is a crazy movie too, because it jumps across a whole lot of different plot points to get to ultimately where it goes. I mean, the fact that we start out
yeah.
where we start out in that movie and that it ends where it ends, there's a lot in between.
I'm
Um,
interested to see how much I enjoy episode 6 through this lens. I think it has potential to turn into my favorite Star Wars movie
ooh, interesting.
because it's going to wrap up the Skywalker story
Yeah,
nicely.
yeah.
So
I
I'm
do love how it
excited to see
ends.
that.
So
I think it may turn out to be my favorite one day. We'll see. So thanks
nice.
for watching. It's been fun. I love episode 5. We talked about it for almost an hour. Don't forget
Yep.
to like and subscribe if you haven't already. We will catch you next week as we talk about Return of the Jedi.